From Charleston's Lowline to the Low Battery to the very latest on the John C. Calhoun Statue debate, I sit down one-on-one with Historic Charleston Foundation Executive Director Winslow Hastie for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Well, Winslow, it is so good to meet you and see you.
Thank you. Likewise, good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Gosh, there's so much going on. From the debate about the Calhoun Statue to the low battery construction to Lowline. What is it like for you to be an executive director of the Charleston Historic Foundation?
So, Historic Charleston Foundation. Yeah. So I just started as the new president and CEO January 2nd.
Right.
So I'm brand new in the role, but I've been there for 12 years.
Right.
So I've been working alongside Kitty, kind of heading up our museums and preservation initiatives since the beginning. So, and I'm a native of Charleston, so I'm from here, grew up downtown, and went away for a long time and came back. So it's nice to be back, and it's been super interesting to watch the trajectory of the city over the past 12 years, kind of being back in Charleston. I mean, it is growing so tremendously. I sort of like to say that it's sort of segueing from a large town to a small city. I kind of feel like that we're in this process. And with that, of course, you have significant growing pains, which are just inevitable. But yeah, I mean, my day-to-day, as you said, I mean, you hit on three you could have thrown in short-term rentals in there, and hotels, and tourism management, and sea level rise, you name it. There's a huge assortment of issues for us to focus on. So it's never a dull moment. We're very lucky at Historic Charleston Foundation because the organization has been around so long and is very well respected in the community. So we're lucky enough to be a part of a lot of these discussions, and we try to the extent that we can to be a leader in some of these discussions, and certainly convening the community around these issues and trying to figure out productive solutions for a lot of the issues. So we do pride ourselves in being very proactive in the community and not just reacting to things that are going on, but actually stepping out and funding different initiatives, bringing in experts from outside to kind of help us bring best practices from other communities and other cities. So
you talk about tourism, short-term rentals, hotels, the low battery, low line, Calhoun Statue. How do you balance all that?
That's a great question. We're lucky enough to have, I have 31 full-time staff at Historic Charleston, and that includes, we have two house museums, the Aiken Red House, the Nathaniel Russell House. We have two significant retail operations, and then also our staff at our headquarters on East Bay Street. So lucky enough in terms of our sort of advocacy, preservation work, I've got a great team of people who help me in that regard, and so it's a delicate dance of delegation and figuring out what skill sets to match to which issue. So for instance, I've got a colleague who has a law degree, and he directs our advocacy programs, and he was our delegate on the short-term rental task force. So I have not been so in the weeds on that issue as he has, and he certainly reports back to me, but he's kind of our representative voice on that issue. Other things, I mean, the Lowline is a really important project for me personally, but also Historic Charleston is a big supporter. I'm currently president of the board of the Friends of the Low Country Lowline. So there's a nonprofit group that we formed a couple years ago to help kind of get that project going, because it's, the Lowline has been contemplated really probably since the 80s. I think Joe Riley started talking about how can we get control of that Norfolk Southern right-of-way and turn it into an asset for the city rather than an eyesore. And but you're dealing with city bureaucracy, you're dealing with a railroad, which are notoriously difficult to work with, and so there's a lot of hurdles there. But we formed this nonprofit and working in conjunction with the city and Norfolk Southern, who ended up being an incredibly flexible and willing partner, and we negotiated with them and got a price that really ultimately worked. So that's been a real important project for me personally. Like I said, sort of on my own, I serve as president of the board of that organization, but it certainly aligns with the mission and the work of Historic Charleston, which is, you know, making sure that the peninsula, or the city, really, the region for that matter, our mission expands beyond just downtown. A lot of people think, oh, y'all are just a downtown organization. The reality is our mission is really more regional. Now, the bulk of our work is done in the city of Charleston.
Sure.
But certainly how the peninsula grows and remains the kind of vibrant heart of this entire region, how it, you know, remains the kind of economic center of the region is really important to us. So a lot of this development that's going on we think is positive.
Okay.
You know, seeing a net increase in residents on the peninsula for the first time in 70
Wow.
years is a big step. I mean, you know, we had this sort of the suburbanization of the city and everybody leaving downtowns, hollowing out cities all across America, obviously kind of post-World War II. And we're just now for the first time seeing a kind of return and the population levels increasing. Now, that's a good thing ultimately from a planning perspective, because you want people living closer to their jobs, because that then helps solve some of our congestion issues. Because if everyone lives really far away from where they work, that just creates a lot of commuting and a lot of congestion. So, you know, we want the downtown to be vibrant and we want it to be growing, but it's all about how it grows. And so that's the kind of fine line that we walk pretty much every day when we review projects. You know, we're lucky enough to have developers come to us, architects, developers, property owners who have projects, and they know that we're going to be a loud voice and an important voice when they go through their kind of entitlement process. So when they go to the BAR, they go to the zoning board or planning commission and ultimately city council, you know, we follow these steps all the way, and we're at all of those hearings. So they know we're going to be there, so it behooves them to kind of bring us into the fold early. So, you know, we work hard to try to, you know, reach compromises with those folks, but, you know, there's certain times when that doesn't work out, and, you know, the Sergeant Jasper is a prime example of that, where, you know, we just couldn't come to terms with the developer, and we felt that, you know, the scale and size of that development in that location was not appropriate. And so we ultimately, you know, litigated that, and we did not prevail. But some positives came out of it. But in general, with development, I mean, we really try to channel that development through policy, planning policies like our preservation plan, our comprehensive plans, the downtown plan, and then, of course, zoning. And we use those tools to try to direct growth where we think it makes sense. So where we're seeing it now, it's, you know, mainly the kind of what's going to, I think, ultimately become the core of our downtown, which is right around where that Courier Square project is going on, sort of Line Street, right there, kind of south of Line, right where sort of the 26 kind of turns into the crosstown. Just south of that, between Meeting and King, is going to be our sort of central business district. And that's been contemplated for decades, actually. I think what's scary is that it's happening so quickly. You know, all of a sudden you see cranes everywhere and all this stuff's happening. I mean, but, you know, that development we see as positive. It's in the center of the city. It's not along the edges. One of our big planning sort of doctrines is that you don't build tall buildings on the edges of the peninsula. So, because you want to be able to protect the views out to the water, and you want to be able to see the skyline, see the steeples, you know, the kind of holy city skyline is a really important part of the character of the city. And we want to kind of maintain that. So the height, we want to kind of concentrate that in the center spine of the peninsula. And then as you march north, once you kind of get out of the core of the historic district, we think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. So, you know, the Morrison corridor, we're already starting to see a lot of development going on there. I think we've barely seen the tip of the iceberg as far as that's concerned. Certainly Upper Meeting Street, north of Line Street, we're starting to see there's lots of cranes popping up there. At Eugene Meeting, there's a lot of development there. So And then, of course, there's West Edge, the whole, biomedical district that the city and medical university sort of had been contemplating for a long time. And again, that was a former landfill. It's sort of outside of the historic district. It abuts the medical district, which has very tall, modern buildings. Sure. Our feeling is if you're ever going to put, some Class A biomedical research facilities and office space, then that's a good place to put it. And it's not a very, I think, if you were to walk it today, it's not a very pleasant experience. It doesn't have an urban feel, and it's kind of it's sort of a dilapidated part of the city. So I think it could use some of that energy and have foot traffic and people dining and walking and just providing some energy to that part of the city. So.
And I think this happened last night, but the Preservation Society basically had this on their Twitter page. It basically says this: Mayor Tecklenburg speaking to Groundswell Charleston about flood mitigation efforts, commits to do better, and says low battery seawall construction will start this year. So when you hear about the construction, what goes to your mind?
Well, again, luckily we've been a part of that discussion from the very beginning. Probably about 9 or 10 months ago, the city convened a group of us to start discussions about the design of the low battery. Understanding, because this is the deal, the low battery, even if we weren't dealing with sea level rise and the flooding issues, the low battery itself is disintegrating. It's in really bad shape. So just from a sheer infrastructure standpoint, it has to be repaired. It basically, was built when Murray Boulevard was created and the peninsula was expanded on that kind of southwestern tip. And they built the seawall. They built it quite well, but it was, they were using materials from that time, and so they were the rebar that they used was not stainless or galvanized, so it's all corroding, and you get what's called corrosion jacking, where it starts to rust and pop, and then it actually pops the concrete and starts breaking it apart. And if you walk the low battery now, if you really take the time to look, which we did a site visit, and it's a little bit shocking how bad it is. And I think if you're jogging or kind of walking by, you might not pay attention, but if you really start looking, it's like, whoa, this does not reflect a world-class city. So we knew it had to be repaired, and we were happy that they were looking at it. I think smartly so, they realized that this is an opportunity to also look at raising the low battery. We certainly have seen over the last 3 seasons some catastrophic weather events, 3 in a row, that have caused significant flooding in downtown Charleston. Certainly it's caused flooding elsewhere too. It's a big issue in West Ashley, Johns Island, James Island. No one is really spared by the flooding, but certainly the south end of the peninsula, the historic district there is pretty vulnerable. Granted that the harbor's right there. And so lifting the low battery is absolutely critical. My concern is that we're maybe not looking long-term enough and not looking to raise it maybe even a little bit higher, I think would be important. Because I went recently to a sea level rise historic preservation conference. I was actually invited to speak there. It's in Annapolis. It was in Annapolis this past fall. And all the projections that there are all these NOAA scientists and NASA people and folks from Department of Defense, Air Force, Navy, all these guys, and they're all in there saying, the projections even from like a year or 2 ago have been redrawn because we don't think they're aggressive enough. That they're looking at, and everyone for whatever reason the year 2100 is a magic. All the projections are what is it going to look like in 2100. I think that's just something our brains can get around. It's a neat, even number. But, they're now saying that you've got to be looking for a minimum of 1 meter rise, so 3 feet minimum sea level rise by 2100. And that's just the middle of the road projection. Of course, there are more aggressive ones that are looking at potentially 6 feet of sea level rise, and then some others that say, oh, maybe it'll be a foot and a half. So I think they're kind of thinking, well, let's split the difference and go right in the middle, and that may be right. I just think we need to really be thinking about how, and that's something the mayor's looking at, which I appreciate, is how we could potentially adapt it, that if we had a storm event or a surge or a hurricane, they could put these panels in the open railings, that they could bring panels in to add, another 2 feet potentially to the wall itself in the event of a hurricane or weather, storm surge. So that's critical. I think, I just came from a meeting with a brand new city councilman, Kevin Shealy, who's in West Ashley, and I think you've interviewed him.
Yes, indeed.
Also,
just this past Monday, too.
Yeah, oh, really? Oh, I should have told him where I was going. So, and we're talking to him about the Lowline, is what we were meeting with him about, but, of course, start talking about flooding. And I think the biggest trick is going to be prioritization, where we prioritize our infrastructure spending. Because there's capital improvements needed to address flooding all over the city. Okay. Church Creek Drainage Basin being a huge one, and one that's top of mind for him and his constituents. Sure. For us, that is a major issue, and we understand, but we also, our feeling is that the historic district is the sort of crown jewel of this entire region. Really, it's the center of the entire region. It's why businesses, companies like Boeing and Volvo and others come here. Sure. They wouldn't come here. I mean, of course, the port is key. Right. But if we didn't have this beautiful historic city that's culturally rich, has great restaurants, it's got great cultural amenities, but it's architecturally, world class. And all of that, I think that is a key driver to the broader kind of economic competitiveness of Charleston. And so we've got to recognize that protecting that is very, very important. And then so that requires some tough discussions, because when you start prioritizing, you're going to have people like Kevin, they're going to say, no, we need to fix it out there. And there's no question that needs to happen, but the reality is we're talking big money. I mean, we've seen that number of $2 billion thrown around. I think that's a pretty generalized number. I don't think it's really tied to any really hard projections, but nonetheless, that's a good figure probably to kind of contemplate. It shows you the magnitude of what we're dealing with. So.
Let me go down the street. Obviously, this has been a topic for, 3 or 4 days now. The proposed John C. Calhoun plaque. Obviously, that's in limbo with City Council. Yeah. And I know the Historic Charleston Foundation.
Okay.
I'll get it right.
We're used to it. We're used to it.
You basically said on Twitter this: revise, rewrite, and defer. Mm-hmm. Where are we with this debate right now?
Well, and we've been talking about this actually for probably 15, 18 months. Certainly, what happened in Charlottesville in August kind of brought everything to a head. But this has been a conversation that we've been having really since, the Emmanuel event, tragedy, and all the discussions around the Confederate flag. And obviously that was excellent what happened in Columbia. But all of a sudden, you start thinking, okay, well, what about Calhoun, the name of the street, Calhoun Street? And, Councilman Gregory and others have put forth the idea of potentially renaming the street. But then, of course, you start thinking about monuments, and the John C. Calhoun is a natural one to focus on because of its sheer size and the kind of presence that it has in the historic district, and it's right smack dab in the center of our city. So, we've been, as a community, been talking about it and, kind of struggling with what to do. And the whole preservation community, it's a big topic. I mean, I went to the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference, which was in Chicago this past fall. And it's a major point of discussion there. Cities, as we all know, we've been seeing what's been happening around the country, but obviously kind of focused in the southeast. So New Orleans, Atlanta, Richmond, Charlottesville, Washington, D.C. Of course, we've got college campuses all around. New York City, looking at Columbus Circle. I mean, it's a big topic. But where we kind of came, and we have not issued any sort of formal position on this, but our feeling about this, and we've talked to a lot of different scholars, including Bernie Powers at the College of Charleston, who's a close friend of the foundation's and worked with us on a lot of different things, particularly around the Aiken Rat House. And his mastery of slave history is so unmatched practically in Charleston. And then Joe McGill, who's also a close friend, and we work with him on a lot of different things. And then lots of others in the community, folks at the Charleston Museum and folks with the History Commission. I mean, Harlan Green, Robert Rosen, others, just sort of just start picking this apart and talking about it. you know, and I know Michael Moore feels differently, so there's a different, but our general consensus is, you know, instead of trying to erase these things, is let's use them as a teaching tool. And I know a lot of people think that that's kind of lame, and that they think that's a punt rather than really dealing with it front and center. But my feeling and our feeling in general is that is really kind of follows what Mayor Tecklenburg was trying to do, which is let's contextualize these things. Let's talk about them in candid vocabulary and language, and let's you know, put them in their place in terms of let's understand what was the environment in which that statue was installed, and we've learned a lot about certainly the lost cause. I've learned a lot about Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the lost cause movement, which is, you know, interesting, and certainly a lot of these monuments came out of that. And you know, let's talk about that and be very frank about it, and again contextualize the monuments with additional interpretive signage and use them as teaching tools. So that's kind of in general sort of our feeling about that, and there's a relative degree of consensus within the kind of preservation and historian kind of circles, but I know of course that it is not 100% consensus, and by any means we certainly, you know, I attended several of the History Commission's meetings at City Hall just to kind of monitor the conversation, and you know, you were seeing, you know, some pretty divergent opinions, obviously, and then that came through at council this past week. So the way I look at it is, and this is something the National Trust came out with a statement on this as well after, I think it was after the Charlottesville event, understanding they really needed to be kind of a national voice on this issue. And and again, they got sort of criticized for, some people saw it as a kind of a punt as well, but their feeling was, look, every community is different, every monument is different, you know, I mean, this is, you know, a Robert E. Lee monument or a monument to somebody who lynched a lot of black people, you know, that, I mean, obviously there's some egregious monuments. Other monuments are more nuanced, there's a more complex history to them. And what they urged, and I tend to agree, is every community's got to have a dialogue around this issue, and it's got to be a very frank, candid dialogue, and it needs to be representative of the entire community. So my feeling is the fact that this was deferred is a great thing, because the more conversation we can have about it, the more, you know, I think each side, you know, people tend to dig in. Certainly in this political climate, it's even, our country's so divided, and you know, on an issue like this, it'd be very easy for just people to get into their entrenched positions and not budge. But I think, you know, we need to try to, you know, dialogue is a form of healing, in my opinion, and it's a way to talk through issues and understand different perspectives, and that's really what's needed, in my opinion.
Winslow Hastie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Quintin.
Anytime.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Take care.
Likewise.